This next episode in our classic Overland series is a real classic. Never mind a classic, it was a real African bush adventure where we experienced everything you can imagine. We encountered swollen rivers, broken bridges, we got stuck, broke down, and even had to make an emergency satellite phone call. It was an epic adventure in old series Land Rovers. Back in the 90s, before Facebook and WhatsApp, we were all part of a Land Rover mailing list called ZA-LRO. One of the members, Henny Rotenbach, decided to organize some overland trips in series Land Rovers. The idea was a cross-border off-road destination, which demanded complete self-sufficient travel, and which wasn't too far. And so Legend's Gonarezhou trip was organized by Henny in 2001. The destination was Gonarezhou National Park in southeastern Zimbabwe. The trip was made up of 12 Land Rovers, mostly Series 3 long wheelbase, a Series 3 short wheelbase, a Series 2 long wheelbase, and a V8 Range Rover Classic. The trip plan was meticulously worked out, but like any decent overland adventure, it never goes according to plan. But we were prepared for anything, and luckily we were, because we were going to need it. The meeting point was the Zambezi Petraport at around 5 a.m. in the morning. It was a bit of a gamble to know if everyone would make it, as the weeks before saw engine and gearbox rebuilds, suspension recons and extra fuel tanks fitted, and all sorts of other prep work. But everyone had arrived and we were ready to roll. The excitement was tangible as we regrouped and arrived for our first night at the Lion and Elephant Motel. We arrived just before sunset, just in time to set up camp and enjoy a couple of beers. The next morning we were up and ready to roll by 9 a.m. and Henny gave us a breakdown of the day's plan.
Once we do the dirt road, I'd recommend we all deflate our tires just a teeny bit, if it's on 3 bar or so. And then it's a terrible corrugated road for about, I think, 80 k's. There's a couple of very sharp hairpins and things, not really hairpins, but awkward turns in the road. Where you can't see any oncoming traffic and that, just be careful of those spots. You'll be crossing a railway line a few times and you just carry straight on. Don't turn off anywhere until you reach a T-junction. At the T-junction, I think we can just wait for everybody to catch up. Then we do a left and we just follow the road until we get the bridge across the Lundi River. We go over the bridge and then about 3 k's further on is Gonarezhou National Park, where the booking office is. We'll be doing the booking in thing, and as I've mentioned on the list, I prefer to handle it because they get terribly confused when anybody interferes and things like that. And from there it's about, I think, another 3 k's to Chipinda Pools. So if all goes well, we should be there at about 1 o'clock, and then we've got the whole of the afternoon to just relax at Chipinda Pools. Alrighty, let's do it then.
This was where the fun started, as we regrouped and an ominous signboard said that the road was closed in 34 kilometers. When we arrived at the Lundi Bridge over the Lundi River, we could see why. The devastation from Tropical Eileen in February 2000 had left the bridge over the Lundi River destroyed. We had to cross over to get to Chipinda Pools, so we had to make a new plan. Driving all the way back on that corrugated road was just not an option. Luckily, there was another open entrance to the park on this side of the river, so we headed back. It was clear that no vehicles had been into the park for months, as it was very overgrown and clearly not in use, but still no problem for the landies. It was getting late as we drove up and down through the washways, overgrown tracks and past fallen trees. Fresh dung in the road and broken mapani branches everywhere were telltale signs of the elephants, although we never saw any. The only traffic or wildlife for that matter that we saw was the odd tortoise crossing the road.
Speed. Yep, got good ground clearance.
After a bit of a drive, we arrived at Chinguli camp. It was a shock to see how this camp had borne the brunt of the Lundi River flood, as it looked pretty battered and neglected. There were no facilities and no water, but luckily we were self-sufficient. It was still an awesome privilege to camp in such a remote spot. The next morning we settled into our new home and took in the amazing views and sights and sounds of the river. Chinguli was our base for the next week, and most of us took the day to relax. A few members of the group decided to drive further north to see if they could find the bush camps where we were supposed to be sleeping.
Are you stronger?
After a relaxing day, we decided that a proper bonfire was in order. There was a lot of driftwood from the floods, and one particularly appealing log that we needed for the fire. It was a great excuse for entertainment and the use of a landy. Dave Elmelman was quick to volunteer his Series 3 short wheelbase, especially after he had just tightened the front wheel bearing. It was great fun and great entertainment, and he had to try a couple of gears before we got going.
Some nice cross echo stuff. Just leave it like that.
Just in case I didn't do the challenge, they give me a rock as well.
Dad, go and let it to the right.
Well, take a sharp one.
Doesn't sound like low range, eh?
Finally, first gear low range slowly but surely pulled the log into place.
Yes, we like it. We like it. Oh yes, baby. Oh yes, baby. I think it's no. Takes you in.
Go!
Cowabunga!
Oh,
yes, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Hey, don't come my feet!
And then we had a proper bonfire going.
We're going to do some serious reorganizing here. Okay, let's get really hot here. Don't step on the black shit. It's hot that side.
What ridiculous thing.
Now that was a lot of fun. What's next?
The next day we set out on an expedition to explore the park. We drove down towards one of the old causeways, which was completely washed away. A narrow line of rocks at the bank showed its previous existence. Dave Immelman drove into the riverbed and over to the water to see if it was shallow enough for us to get through to the other side. The river was still flowing strongly and didn't look fordable. Brian had decided to have a closer look and see if he could get through, but he didn't even get close. He got bogged down in the wet sand, and that was with his lockers fully locked front and back. So after letting out some air out of the tires and then getting a little bit of help from some friends, he managed to get out again. So there was no possibility of crossing the river, and so we decided to set off again. This time we were in search of Chilojo cliffs. The drive was beautiful, crossing the sandy river areas and then passing through the beautiful forest with the big trees and up and down through some dips and gullies. We passed through a few campsites and then stopped off at ZA-LRO camp, where we could take in the beautiful views of the Chilojo cliffs in the distance. But we still had to get there, and so we followed the road up towards the cliffs. We were really looking forward to it and excited to see the views from the top, which are legendary. The road up to the cliffs hinted at what we could expect, It's one of those iconic African views that you just can't miss out on. Just imagine the flood water coming through here. It must have been spectacular. After a successful expedition, we were in high spirits and looking forward to the drive back, which was going to be fun. But the heat of the day was setting in, and we were ready to get back to camp and get into that river with a nice cool water and some cool beers. Back at the camp, we had to be cautious of the crocodiles, who were clearly visible on the opposite bank. So with some lookouts and a safe spot in the shallow, flowing section of the river, we took a cool dip. We were served beer by Mani van Eden, dressed like a waiter.
He's serving the people down in the pool. He's got his voorskoot on, and he's got his tray, and his cloth over his arm, of course.
That night we enjoyed another amazing fire in the bush. We reflected on an amazing few days that we had had, and we were reluctant to leave the next day. We enjoyed another late night with many jokes around the campfire.
I can just see those guys tomorrow morning when they start to work.
And then we had the chair incident, where Brian's old and well-used chair finally gave way.
This is a bog chair.
Hey! Let's check that thing, it's front, it's front.
No, they're cursing, he's standing next to the road. It is on my foot. Pick up on coming off automatic scanning. So the text will come off Sattelite network and the images will be coming off Chilojo.
Okay, come on Brian, do it.
27 or 1, 2.
The highlight was when we all crowded around Brian's sat phone to make a very urgent call. It was to our friend Paul Oxley, who was unable to come on this trip, and we had to ask him to send us more beer.
Hey, you leave a message for him.
That's incredible. Has to be in it.
Come on, you gotta answer, mate.
You have to must say something.
Oh, no, man, fuck off.
How's it, Paul? It's us Oaks here in Gonarezhou. Leaving you a message. Why don't you answer your friggin' phone, man?
Bring beer.
Bring beer! Help! We need beer!
It was a fun end to an unforgettable week. The next morning we were packed up and ready to go, but Marnie's bonnet was up and had drawn a crowd. Turns out that his clutch master cylinder had packed up. The culprit was some faulty seals. In a flash his bonnet was off and the repair work had started.
brother to the little one.
In the meantime, Yaku provided entertainment as he interrogated Dave's toolbox.
One serious vibrator.
Yaku, these aren't sex tools.
I was just thinking, you know. Now this is a very, very important tool. Yes. We don't know what Dave does with it, but it smells suspect as well.
Meanwhile, the work carried on, and Dave dug into his very well kitted out toolbox to find a set of replacement rubbers.
More rubber.
With many helping hands, the clutch was back in and being topped up with fluid in no time.
Okay, hierdie pomp laat ons kyk of hy olie uitkom.
Do what you best at. Okay, hold it down there, man, now.
Okay, kom uit.
Nog een beetje.
Nog met mijn stiek.
Money tight enough. Top there.
Alright, Manny, maak hom vas.
Ja, maar wel vast. Hold it down there. I need.
Hold it down. Wat wil ek van daai groen lampie asseblief by lede op die
You want a
tafel?
lock?
Our only option was to drive out the way that we had come in, through the mostly overgrown tracks. En route, we had to rescue a chameleon who wasn't impressed at being rescued and picked up, but looked quite happy with the tree that we chose for him. Once back on the tar, we stopped off for some supplies and then headed for the border. Our last braai and overnight stop was across the border back in South Africa at Aventura Chippies. Here we spent the night and then said our goodbyes in the morning as each of us headed back home and looked forward to the next time we would get together on another epic Legends trip.